We are back for episode 3 of STEM Conversations. Now, the past 2 episodes, I have started with how are you feeling? But I'm going to change it up today and I'm going to say, tell me your favourite thing about your day so far.
Okay, I would say quite confidently the best part of my day so far is that for 11s I had not 1 but 2 slices of stollen because,
Oh.
it's winter now, shops are stocking up on stollen. This was a marzipan covered stollen as well, so even better.
No, not for me in the slightest. I can't stand marzipan.
Wow, thanks for that. I really enjoyed it.
I
On that
can't.
topic, Sarah,
Mm-hmm.
I've actually got another happy accident for you in terms of inventions or discoveries.
Oh,
Linked to
okay.
stollen, okay? So
No.
this it's linked slightly to the marzipan at least.
I like it. I like it.
So I can tell you that a chemist called Konstantin Fahlberg was eating his dinner roll and in the lab where he works, and he realised it tasted very, very sweet. And so he sort of retraced his steps and he realised that the substance saccharin that he'd been working with that day was still on his hands and it had
Ah.
made his sandwich roll sweet. So that's how it was discovered. But firstly, imagine this saccharin is 300 to 400 times more sweet than sugar. So imagine what his sandwich actually tasted like. And
Yeah.
also, there was a bit of tension because he had a supervisor that he should have given some credit to for this, but he took all the credit himself and then he gained profit from the discovery.
That is really interesting. I'm really enjoying these discovery things. I think we should start making it at the start of each one.
We might run out.
No, we won't. We will. Maybe I'll bring one to the table next time. Maybe
Okay.
that's what we could do. Maybe that's what we could do. So, in this episode, we're talking with Jen Shearman. And funny enough, this was actually recorded before the curriculum and assessment reviews. A lot of what we're talking about in this episode, it was just guesswork, excited guesswork at this point. But what was something that stood out to you from the episode?
Jen talked a lot about the difference between equity and equality. And I know that when I was younger, equality was something that was heavily pushed. We should all be treated the same. And now we've got this different lens, this equity lens, where we shouldn't necessarily be treated the same because our barriers are somewhat different. And an example that suits our podcast quite well that Jen spoke about was the offering of triple science or further maths at GCSE. Jen stated that perhaps schools that are in less affluent areas just don't offer those more challenging subjects to their students because of the barriers to learning that they might have at home, such as perhaps not having a laptop, not having a tutor. And then that was in the review, wasn't it? It talked a lot about triple science and that all schools should at least offer it, whereas now 10% don't.
Mhm.
What about you? What did you take from it that was the most interesting?
So something that I really enjoyed listening to was when she was discussing oracy, which we now know is a really big finding from the curriculum and assessment review as well. She talked a lot about oracy in the classroom and making sure that everyone's voice had the chance to be heard. And that kind of brings me back to your equity, equality, that debate that we talked about a little bit. We also talked a little bit about subject-specific vocabulary, and we had a really good discussion about language, and especially language within early years, and how every single child in the early years has this vast knowledge of
I know
dinosaur
where you're
vocabulary.
going.
Dinosaur vocabulary. She told us a joke in
A
the
great
episode.
joke. Yeah.
It was a very good joke. Okay, so I'm going to end our introduction with a joke.
Oh.
What do you get when you cross a dinosaur with a firework?
Right. When you say it, it's going to be really obvious and I'll be annoyed at myself.
But you don't know.
Hang on. Thinking time, please. It's all about processing.
It is. It is.
Although I must confess, I don't know the names of many dinosaurs, so I'm not going to get it. What is it?
Don't think of a specific dinosaur. What do you get when you cross a dinosaur with a firework?
Sparklosaurus.
It is dynamite.
Where does the mic come from? Oh, that, okay. I thought it had to end in like a saurus or actyl or something. I'm going to put that one in my arsenal.
I think on the back of that wonderful joke, we have spoken enough. Let's hear what Jen's got to say. Hello and welcome back to STEM Conversations. This podcast is created to share stories, ideas, and experiences shaping science, technology, engineering, and maths. I'm Sarah, and as always, I'm joined by my co host Ash.
Hi, today we're joined by Dr Jen Shearman. Jen is the Chief Learning Officer at MEI, a charity dedicated to helping every young person feel confident using and understanding maths in their daily lives. She was previously Director for Evaluation and Impact at NCETM, and she's a passionate advocate for maths education, educational evaluation, and women in STEM. Jen, we're delighted to have you with us.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me. What a privilege to be able to talk about my favourite subject. So thank you.
Now, we're really, really excited to have you with us on this episode. So today we are going to be discussing equity in STEM education. So we're going to look at how we design, how we teach and evaluate learning so that every young person has an equitable opportunity to succeed. But before we get into the big themes, we like to just do a little bit of a warm up, and we like to know what is exciting you most in your career right now.
Thank you. Well, I am very new, very fresh to MEI. I've actually only been there a couple of months, and I'm their very first Chief Learning Officer. So it's a brand new role for the organisation. I've spent my first couple of months doing a lot of listening, a lot of learning, and building a team of experts in some really strategically important areas. So I've got a lead for kind of further education and adult maths, someone leading on data science, curriculum, learning technology, and project development. And, you know, together as a team, we're looking forward to working as part of MEI to really make a positive difference to anybody involved in STEM education, whether a young person, an adult, a teacher, or a school leader, which is fantastic. What's the next big thing? Well, at the time of recording, we're all awaiting with bated breath the curriculum and assessment review.
We are.
And Professor Francis, who's led this, you know, she's been really clear that the reason for a review isn't because the current curriculum isn't working, it's because it's not working for all. And so we're really hoping that this new review gives an opportunity to really reshape it as STEM education to make sure it is equitable.
It feels like this, you know, the feeling before sort of a holiday or something like that, like, you know, something's coming.
A little bit, isn't it? It is a little bit. There's been so much consultation. Hopefully every teacher or everybody involved in education has had the opportunity to have their say and have their voice. And now let's see what comes out.
So let's start with the foundation. The term equitable education is used a lot in discussions about STEM teaching, but it's often confused with equality or inclusion. How do you define equity in education, and why does that distinction matter in STEM?
Yeah, so I'm going to refer here to my colleague Jane Hawkins at the NCTM, who absolutely deserves a shout out. And she really leads some important work in this area. And what Jane would say is that equity is about making sure that everybody is supported to succeed in whatever STEM pathway they are currently on. And it's not about treating everybody the same, it's understanding that not everybody has equal chance of success, that some people have more barriers than others. And so it's making sure that, STEM education both removes barriers to all in STEM, but actually has some targeted interventions to level the playing field for those people, for whatever reason, have less chance to succeed. And this particularly matters in STEM as actually, if you look at the kind of STEM sector, there is not equal representation by everybody. So there are fewer women in STEM than there are men. Yeah. There are fewer people from minority ethnic backgrounds. And there are fewer people who have got special educational needs, you know, including those who are neurodivergent. We also know that young people from less resource backgrounds, so those with, less affluent parents, are less likely to gain the highest grade in STEM GCSEs. So therefore, they're less likely to progress to STEM degrees and STEM kind of careers. And this really matters because there are just not enough people working in STEM. It's a huge sector. It's really important. It's going to be even more important in the future. So widening access to STEM and making it more inclusive is going to be better for everyone, right? It's good for society as a whole, and obviously it's good for the STEM sectors. So if we can crack this, then actually we're really addressing a lot of really important things.
I would completely agree. I think it's so important that we get this right. It's so important that we are giving that equitable access to all people so they can succeed. And I do think it starts really, really early on within education and, probably before formal education as well. So I think there's a lot of exciting things to come. So we've looked at the term equity then. The next question that I'd like to unpick with you is how we design for it then. So we know that curriculum decisions shape not just what students learn, but who feels that the learning is for them. And I think that's really, really important. So how do you think curriculum design intentionally supports equitable access, representation, and a sense of belonging really in STEM subjects?
Yeah, I mean, great question, and something that we could talk about for hours, I'm sure. So I've tried to break it down into kind of different aspects of the curriculum. So you've kind of got the intended curriculum, so kind of what you plan, and to a certain extent, that's really going to be shaped, we hope, by the curriculum and assessment review. What is taught, so the choices that teachers or the parents make in the classroom or in the home, and then what is learned. What do the students actually take from that experience, and actually learn from and change the way that they think about STEM and build up their knowledge. So again, my colleague Jane would say that equitable STEM education requires expert teaching, and that's about an inclusive pedagogy and curriculum. So planning to explore some topics that are inclusive of all, and teaching them in such a way that everybody can access that teaching and be inspired by it, and recognising the characteristics of the learners in the classroom, particularly those that have historically presented barriers to achievement. So whether that's gender, socioeconomic status, ethnicity, SEN, understanding who is in front of you and how you can reach everybody in that classroom. And as you said before, people need to see that STEM is for them. Whoever it is in the classroom, they need to be able to see themselves in that environment. So there is a few quick wins, making sure that images and names in books and on PowerPoints reflect the diversity in society. And making sure that questions and problems are appropriate for people that, come from different backgrounds, have different levels of cultural capital. The history of STEM is so rich, and should include global contributions to science and maths. I've just come back from Peru, and I got very excited about seeing a quipu for the first time in a museum, and like this big knotted thing. It was amazing. You could have a really, exciting maths or geography lesson using those and talking about the history of number and bases, etc., etc. But I'll stop there before I get too overexcited. We need to make sure that everyone's voice feels heard in the classroom, and that really speaks to improving oracy. It's learning to talk about STEM in the classroom and learning through talk about STEM in the classroom. So it's about different types of talk. So we all expect teachers to do a lot of talking in the classroom. So we want teacher to student talk, but we want some really high quality student to teacher talk and student to student talk. And there's lots of different ways that can be done, and there's different professional development for teachers in bringing oracy to life in the classroom. And talking helps students develop subject-specific vocabulary alongside feeling comfortable to express their own opinions and express their own culture in a way that makes them feel comfortable. It makes them feel that STEM is for them. We know that not everybody has equal access to the current curriculum, and there's a variety of reasons for this. So children from underrepresented or disadvantaged backgrounds are more likely to be in lower sets, so therefore less likely to do, for instance, the higher papers at GCSE or to experience the full breadth of curriculum. And we know that schools in less affluent areas are less likely to offer triple science or less likely to offer things like further maths at GCSE. And there's less likely to have access to the technology such as graphic calculators, computers, proper scientific equipment, etc. So there's another barrier there. And finally, the teaching population. There's not enough science and maths teachers, so we know that not everybody will get the level of education that perhaps they could have, particularly in challenging areas. And the teaching population is not particularly diverse, particularly at senior levels. So, we may need to make sure that where possible, we can provide access to diverse STEM role models. And again, with technology, there's no reason that we can't do that.
I think, Jen, every area of that answer we could sit and discuss all day. But the one I personally want to dive into and think it's very apt timing is what you said about sort of triple science or separate science. Coming from a secondary science perspective, recently some external media have reported that the curriculum review is looking at separate sciences because 10% of schools in the country don't offer it. That's a big topic of conversation, very current, talking about triple. And what you say about further maths, I've not worked at a school that does deliver further maths.
Most schools don't do further maths at GCSE. Interestingly, MEI is doing some work with some schools in Birmingham that are targeting students who are higher prior retaining, so they get greater depth in their SATs, for one of a better way of expressing it, but making sure those students then achieve highly at GCSE. So if you're from an underrepresented background and you score highly at Key Stage 2, you're less likely to then progress to getting a really good grade at GCSE than if you have from a more affluent background. And there's a variety of reasons for that. And some of these schools in Birmingham are offering further maths at GCSE for this group of students with some expert teaching to, again, try and close those gaps, because there's no cognitive reason why someone's background should affect how they do in maths. There's lots of other reasons that sit alongside that, but equitable access is about trying to level that playing field a bit.
Absolutely.
I've been reading a lot into the power of oracy, really. So that having that language very much to speak like a scientist or speak like a mathematician, and having that vocabulary that can really, really help with that idea of feeling like you belong. And these are really quick wins. I'm not saying that they're easy to implement. And of course, it takes a long time and a lot of research to do it effectively, to help children, to help young adults feel more represented, more seen within STEM.
Yeah, they're just things that people perhaps don't notice. So I have the privilege of going into a lot of schools, and I am a bit pernickety at looking at all the posters and like, why are they all men to represent success in science? Or looking at a textbook and why are these all English names when I'm in a school and we can see the rich diversity of the cultural heritage of pupils in the school. So once you notice it, I think you will automatically change your behaviour, and it's about making sure people are aware that this is an issue and having the chance to do something about it.
So connecting STEM learning to real world issues like finance, technology, sustainability can make it feel more relevant and inclusive. How might these kinds of real world links support an equitable teaching approach, and what are the risks if they're not done thoughtfully?
Yeah, I probably might start with the risks, because, and this is just from where I come from, my own career has really focused on different ways of teaching key concepts underpinning STEM subjects well. So the interim curriculum assessment review talked about kind of a mastery curriculum, and the NCTM would talk about teaching for mastery. And that is just making sure that fundamental concepts in maths and science are taught well so they can then be applied elsewhere. And I would really advocate school departments, particularly at secondary level, but I'm sure at primary as well, making sure that the individual subjects are taught well, but then are sequenced correctly. I was a maths teacher, but I've spent a lot of time with science teachers, and it's really interesting that the same concepts are met in both subjects and not necessarily in a logical sequence or in a logical way.
Yeah.
So I've sat in the middle of arguments about definitions, about words. So power, accuracy, average, factor, estimate. I think I said something was accurate when I should have said precise in front of the science teacher, and I quite rightly was corrected. So again, different teachers with different expertise talking about that and making sure that what the pupils see is non-confusing and sequenced correctly is really important. So, perhaps it's best that a young person gets an understanding of how to draw a graph in maths before they then have to interpret one in science, and labeling axes and things like that. Just making sure that the learning journey is coherent. Otherwise, we're confusing young people as opposed to building upon their knowledge. So I would say get that right first.
Yeah. When you were talking about being in sort of a room with science teachers and maths teachers and the language, just gives me such nostalgia to the whole line of best fit conversation. How a line of best fit can sometimes be a curve in science.
The big curve doesn't go through the X.
Yeah. Wow.
They get very passionate.
The idea of the curriculum cohesion has to be correct first is something really important to focus on. I know, speaking from a primary perspective, there's so many opportunities because you do have that single teacher that is teaching maths and science and geography, things like that. So there's so many opportunities where you can look at that bigger picture, that overview, and find where those links are. But yeah, I've also been privy to lots of conversations, lots of heated debate really around teaching maths, teaching science and how it aligns. But if we can get it right, I think it's imperative, really.
Yeah, I'm from a secondary background and I've been into primary classrooms, and the expertise of the teacher in weaving together fundamental concepts across subjects is a joy to behold. So, if you're a secondary teacher, try and find an opportunity to go into a primary school and see your subject, but then see the other subjects as well. It's a really interesting and fulfilling experience.
I'm going to always big up primary teachers.
Wasn't I so humbled when I started working with primary teachers, and they were teaching me things that I was so embarrassed I didn't know as a secondary science teacher. Children could name specific fossils, whereas I would have just talked about the rock cycle forming fossils, but they know the specific fossils in primary. Incredible.
Yeah, and every dinosaur, obviously.
Yeah, of course.
Of course. Absolutely, of course. That's not even in the curriculum, but that's just knowledge that every single child knows. I have been so impressed with, when you've got a child in the early years and they can name dinosaurs that I didn't even know existed, but they are confident.
Yeah, I have a friend who's a paediatrician, and apparently the best bit of advice that they were given, before they qualified, was you've got to have a favourite dinosaur.
Now I'm going to ask you what your favourite dinosaur is.
Oh, I quite like a brontosaurus.
Okay.
I quite like, big, majestic, just kind of wafts through the jungle. Let's all the other dinosaurs fight amongst themselves.
I like it. Ash, have you got a favourite dinosaur?
Okay, I was hoping you wouldn't come to me with that one. I'm going to say pterodactyl because they can fly, essentially. I feel like pterodactyls make me feel like maybe there's still a bit of hope that dragons exist.
Why can't you tell when a pterodactyl goes to the toilet?
I don't know.
Because the P is silent.
Like it.
Bit of STEM.
This would go down well in an early years classroom.
You can go in your bloopers.
Okay, so designing for equity is one thing, and then knowing whether it happens in practice is another, really. How would a school know if its students are genuinely experiencing equitable STEM learning opportunities? And what kinds of evidence can help schools understand what's working and where change is needed?
Yeah, really great question. Really hard question. I suspect every school in the country is grappling with this. How do we know what to do, and whether it's having an impact? Do I have one answer? No, I don't. I'm afraid. But there's lots of things that schools can do that will make these marginal differences, and it is about marginal differences, and it is about proxy measures if we're going to do some evaluation, rather than, gosh, if we do X in the classroom, our results are going to go up by 10%. If it was that simple, every school would be doing it. I think what schools can do actually is to be aware of what kind of gaps and differences they have. So schools will all be aware of the headline data, perhaps for all their children, and then they might look at free school meal data because that's a really important benchmark. But they might not know the difference between kind of girls and boys, or they might not look so much at the progress of kind of previously higher attaining student from underrepresented backgrounds as opposed to the progress of higher attaining students from more affluent backgrounds. And then the senior leadership can decide what the priority should be and when, because you can't do everything at once. So if a school looks at its data and thinks, gosh, we're not seeing equal progress in our STEM subject for all our pupils, we'd really like to tackle this, let's make this a priority, and then kind of go ahead. As opposed to in relation to looking at pupils, I'm a big fan of observing pupil engagement in lessons. So I'm not observing the teacher, I'm observing the students and what they're up to. So who has a chance to talk, and what is being said, what key vocabulary is being said? Does everyone have equitable opportunity to contribute or be engaged? Is there a group of pupils persistently losing out? And, again, don't just go and see one lesson. These are the kind of things that if you're a head of maths or a head of science, or if you're the maths or science lead in primary, you can get a sense of if you go and see children working in their natural environment as such. So I'm a big fan of observation of pupils. Lots of teachers go, I'm not a researcher. How could I know what's happening in my classroom? You already do. And perhaps it's just about applying your reflectiveness to a specific area. So looking, for instance, at vocabulary, or looking at who is speaking in the lesson. Is it more boys than girls? Or is it the more affluent students as opposed to those, who are less resourced? Memorably, I once worked with a teacher who was doing a master's in education, and they wanted to know what the pupils found useful in the classroom. So they were a primary teacher, and they said they had loads of displays, they had a working wall, they had a board, they had books, and they really wanted to know what students were using. So they set up this situation where they gave each child a Post-it note. I think they had to put their initials on it. And every time they used something in the classroom, they had to get up and stick a Post-it note on it. I mean, can you imagine the chaos, after 10 minutes of all these Post-it notes everywhere? But it was really great data. And the kids stuck Post-it notes to the teacher, which I thought was beautiful. But it was really interesting kind of what they used. So, use creative ways.
There was a couple of things that stood out for me. The first was the idea of, the sticky notes. That's something that I genuinely haven't ever thought to ask of children, especially young children as well. Don't get me wrong, they love giving feedback. If you ever give them a chance or an opportunity to feedback, they will, and it's very honest. So yeah, I'd definitely say be prepared. But it's such an interesting way of thinking of it. What is it in the room that's helping you learn? And is that helpful for everyone? So not just taking that immediate feedback as in, okay, that had the most sticky notes on there, so therefore that's the most useful, but then breaking that down into groups as well. So are girls finding this as useful as boys? And if not, why not? So it gives you so much to unpick and to think about just by using that pupil voice as well. I really, really like that idea. I did have one question though. With that, when you talk about the observation, would you expect each subject, again from a primary perspective, each subject lead to do it for their area, or would that be better coming from a senior leadership perspective?
The senior leadership needs to give space for the evaluation to happen, but they don't necessarily need to do it. So I think where things don't go so well, either the senior leadership has no buy-in to a change that somebody wants to make. So therefore the teacher never is given, for instance, time to go to PD or time to go and observe learning. So that's one way in which things fall down when a person hasn't got an opportunity to do it. So that's a bit of a politician's answer, really. So I think the senior leadership has got to make space for it to happen. And whether they do it themselves, whether they lead the change themselves, or whether they delegate the leadership of that change to somebody else, I guess is down to the senior leader, and also the size of the school. And
I'm just taking it back to the sticky note task, because I'm wondering how many of those students I'm thinking back to myself as a young person, and potentially Sarah will vouch even now. If I was doing something and we were all doing it at the same time, I think I'd stick the sticky note somewhere different to everyone else just to be different, and maybe my answer might not actually be that reliable.
That's why you need a large sample size, right? You couldn't do that with one
Very good
pupil,
answer,
but,
Jen.
you know, you might get a model. Thanks, thanks.
So what you've already sort of touched on is the fact that equity isn't just achieved through the curriculum alone, it's lived out through teachers and leaders. And that does mean culture, confidence, professional learning. How can professional development and leadership culture empower teachers to make equity a lived reality in every classroom, not just a policy statement?
It's really tough in schools. So they need to both do the right stuff, so pick
Yeah.
the right intervention, and they need to do it right. So they need to implement it in schools. And those things are really tricky. But if you don't do both of those things, then you're sort of wasting your time, really. So it's definitely better to make a small change and do it consistently than to try and do too many things. And I'm sure we've all been in schools where there are just too many initiatives and they all fall down. And, you know, again, we've talked about this before, senior leadership is key here. They have to recognise it as a priority and they have to enable the change to happen, whether it's leading it themselves or delegating it to a colleague. I mean, I would advocate, you know, distributive leadership wherever possible. You know, we need to grow our teachers into experts, you know, because they'll be better teachers. They'll then inspire other teachers, and that might address some of the retention issues we have in teachers. You know, teachers don't feel empowered to be leaders in their classroom. Spend some time picking the right interventions and then have an implementation plan and really break it down. What are you going to do first? How are you going to monitor it? Then what are you going to do? How are you going to monitor it? And if things aren't working, be prepared to change. And it sounds very simple standing here, and it's really hard to do at a school because schools are so busy environments. So there's loads of organisations that are really passionate to help schools. So reach out to those. You know, whether that's maths or science or geography or economics or whichever aspect of STEM you want to. You know, a lot of it is funded or is subsidised. And work with that organisation that you feel that you can help you. Pick the group of students that you'd like to make a difference in. You can't do everything at once, you know. So if it's about girls speaking more in physics lessons, then just do that. If it's, you know, increasing the diversity of, you know, names in textbooks and lessons, then do that. And then monitor how much that's happening. And if something's not going right, be prepared to tweak it, be prepared to change. So some schools find it really hard to be able to take students off site for whatever reason. Can we get somebody in, or can we have a webinar, or can we utilize a parent that's working in an industry to kind of come in and be a role model? So, you know, tweak things where we can.
I think the key thing that stood out for me there is the idea of the flexibility and change. So quite often we get a plan, we think we've cracked it in terms of the implementation is broken down, everything's going really well. But sometimes it feels quite difficult to go off that path and go off that course. It can feel quite tricky sometimes to think, well, if this isn't working, what else might? But I suppose with some of the hints and the tips that we've talked about throughout this, then they should be able to have that flexibility, have that confidence to be flexible. So educational opportunities can look very different depending on geography, urban, rural, or regional contexts. How can schools and communities work together to ensure every young person has an equitable access to STEM opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, how is a hard question. You know, should they? Yes, they should. And it's an important question because different areas of the country have different challenges, but also different opportunities, particularly within STEM. There might be an employer or a university or a different organisation that would really appreciate, you know, a highly educated local community in that area and then will support schools to do that. And I've talked about, you know, what MEI is doing in Birmingham, and that's part of that. And they're really trying to spread that to other areas of the country, but it is challenging. And in challenging areas where there aren't many opportunities, that's where we need to be working the most in order for it to be more equitable, et cetera, et cetera. So collaboration is a big part of the Maths Hubs program. So if what you want to do is make changes in maths, the Maths Hubs will absolutely put schools together to work collaboratively to make change across a local area. So that's already there. I'm sure there are similar things in science, but so that's less of my area of expertise. And give teachers time to work together. Schools shouldn't be in competition with each other. It should be about saying, gosh, if my English results are brilliant and my STEM results are less good, let's go and see the school that's the other way around, and let's learn from each other and have expert teachers working together to develop their pedagogy. So how can they do that? It's about trying to give time and space. It's really tricky to let teachers off timetables.
Yeah.
But I think the longer term benefits of that are worth the short term kind of trickiness with it. It is important, and it's about finding a way that works for a school and using what's around them. So using local employers, using universities, using other outreach opportunities. Easier said than done, but it's important.
I think I got a lot from watching others, and there's so many things that other teachers are thinking of and implementing and doing in the classroom that either you've not had time to read or research yet or to implement with your own classroom. And the power of watching somebody else do the same job as you do. And it might be in a school that's just down the road, and therefore the demographic of children are completely different. But I know for me, I got huge benefits from watching other teachers and seeing this is the issue that we're having, how are you tackling it?
Yeah, I mean, schools can get together to offer enrichment events or, maths challenges, or they can get a speaker that will cover a couple of schools. There are opportunities if schools can enable themselves to work in collaboration with other schools.
Yeah, I would have loved to have gone to local schools that were sort of reaching a similar cohort of students. But sometimes when you find yourself in quite a big multi-academy trust, you end up staying a little bit within that trust and going to the other schools in the trust that are doing the exact same thing as you. So actually listening to you both talking about that, something that I never experienced and I wish I had, was going to local schools that were essentially our competitors and seeing how they did things.
Yeah, there's a report came out a couple of years ago about the educational landscape and the different ways that collaboration can happen and the tensions with that. So
Yeah.
within any area, you've got a maths hub, that will work with all their schools in their hub area. You've probably got a local authority or two that has some schools that it works with. And then you've got multi-academy trusts.
Yeah.
And then you've got schools that are on their own. And it's really tricky to navigate all of those different networks that work in some ways and don't work in others. And I remember talking to a senior leadership from an academy trust, sort of saying, well, yeah, why would I need to go outside of my academy trust for PD? And I said, but the other academy trusts might not be in your geographical area, so they might not have the same challenges and opportunities that your school has, but the school next door probably is in that situation. So go and work with them as well. But it's tricky, but important.
So to end our conversation, we want to give listeners one key takeaway from each episode. So what's one idea, perspective or piece of advice you'd love listeners to carry with them after this conversation?
Yeah, so if you're a teacher of maths, whether you're at primary or secondary, just engage with your local maths hub. Okay, that's a quick one because there is something for every teacher of mathematics, and it's all fully funded. It's all absolutely free. So please do that. In science, I say I have less expertise. I most recently evaluated the effectiveness of a consortium called Planet Possibility. And that was a group of organisations that did some really great things. So go and check those out. They've got a website. More generally, schools have to do the right stuff and do it right. So pick a really small change you want to make, research the best way of making it, and do it consistently.
Fab. I think that's Yeah, a really great takeaway. I think for me is the idea of the different ways that you can evaluate whether something is effective within that. I would love to go into a classroom right now and to do the sticky note task and then
I
look at
wouldn't.
that and see what the data is. I would.
You don't have to be sticking notes. You could do something else. You could give them iPads with a map of the
Wow.
classroom on, and they put like little dots on. You could.
That's a
you
much
could do
more
anything. Like,
rigorous, organised idea, so that's quite up my street. I like routine, Jen.
different ways of evaluating, and there's lots of different ways of doing research. And actually, if you read any research papers, for instance, from the Charter College, like read sort of some of the inquiries and research that teachers and practitioners are doing in classrooms, and there's some really diverse methods, and that's what makes the difference. That's what makes teachers feel empowered to lead the learning in their classrooms, and it's fun too.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Jen, I genuinely could continue picking your brain and talking about this for a really, really long time. And I just want to say thank you so much for joining us on this episode.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I really, this is what gets me out of bed in the morning. I'm really lucky to have a job where hopefully I can make a small difference in a really important sector and give everybody an opportunity to succeed in STEM. And if anyone listening wants to get in contact with me, I will happily talk the hind legs of a donkey to them as well. So please do so.
We just want to end by saying a big thank you to everyone listening as well. And don't forget to follow STEM Conversations wherever you get your podcasts. Join us next time for more stories and ideas shaping science, technology, engineering, and maths.